Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
What are flow batteries? Well, the technology's been around for a while, but it's fair to say it's never really taken off, perhaps until now. The CEO and founder of XL Batteries joins me, Tom Sisto, to educate us on all things flow batteries, sharing his story on why their version could be game-changing for grid energy storage. I think you'll find this conversation flowed quite nicely. We hope you enjoy. Another first for the show is talking about flow batteries and all things XL batteries as well. I know you're going to give us a nice overview of that. So I'm hoping as a result, this conversation will flow very nicely today. So on that topic, it'd be great if you could give us a little bit of history on flow batteries, the successes, the challenges it's had to date. I appreciate it's been around for a while, this technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll try to use as many liquid puns as I can as we kind of go through the process. So it's great to be here. Thank you very much for hosting me. Excited to kind of get a moment to talk about XL and flow batteries and long duration energy storage. I think an important topic for society kind of moving forward. So excited to educate and talk about the grid. Flow batteries. Really, really interesting topic that probably not a lot of people know anything about. Most people probably have never heard of a flow battery. And so we'll kind of start there with what is a flow battery. So a flow battery is a type of battery in which the charge storage material is dissolved in liquid. And so it's very different from sort of the batteries that most people are used to. Most people are used to, say, like a AA battery or a 9-volt or a lithium ion battery, a battery designed for size and weight, something that can move around and provide mobility in terms of electricity, unplugged from the wall, if you will. So flow battery is a very different type of battery. It's heavy. And it's heavy because there's liquid involved. And so generally acid is the liquid. So NASA invented it a long time ago as sort of an alternative architecture. It was in the 80s. And what it is it's vanadium, probably a metal that most people have never heard of. If you own tools, maybe you have. But it's vanadium metal, so mined from the earth, dissolved into sulfuric acid. And that's the liquid that the vanadium is dissolved into, and then that's stored in tanks. And then from there, that is flowed with the pipes and pumps through a cell. And so if you want to take a step back, it's very similar to a car. There's an engine and a gas tank. And the engine is your horsepower and your torque, and the gas tank is sort of how far you can drive the car for. And they're independently leverable, meaning if you want to change your gas tank from a 10-gallon gas tank to a 20-gallon gas tank, you could drive twice as far, but you don't have to change the engine. A flow battery was designed for that intent. And so it's the same thing. You have a tank with the liquid, and in this case, vanadium metal dissolved into it, and then that's flowed through a cell, and that's the engine. If you've ever heard of a fuel cell, it's exactly the same as a fuel cell, except instead of hydrogen flowing through this box of cells, and in that case, fuel, it's consumed and then refilled. This is circulated. And so it's just a continuous loop, closed loop system. So that's a flow battery. Old architecture, already among the world's largest batteries. People probably don't know this, but Sumitomo in Japan has been operating flow battery on the grid for 20 plus years, single battery. In China, they're building an 800 megawatt hour vanadium flow battery. There's a few public companies that are doing vanadium flow batteries at the utility scale. So highly mature, very engineered, old established technology with a cost problem. The cost is the vanadium and then the sulfuric acid and the expense of that sulfuric acid on the components that are inside. That pump is a very expensive pump. The membrane that separates the positive and the negative side of batteries is a very expensive membrane because sulfuric acid is highly corrosive. And so XL batteries, what we are is essentially a new fuel. We are a new liquid for the flow battery with organic molecules dissolved in pH neutral water. And so we've removed the cost of vanadium because it's a fairly scarce metal. 95% of it is in China and Russia, and we can sort of talk about supply chain and things like that. But it's also just not as abundant as it needs to be for impacting global energy. infrastructure, and then the sulfuric acid, or pH neutral water. And by removing the corrosivity, we remove the cost structure of the device. Same engineering, different componentry, different plastics and rubbers, different membrane, ultra low cost. And so that's sort of what we are, is bringing a new liquid into the archetype of a flow battery and driving cost out.
Yeah, a nice overview. Thank you, Tom. That's educated in a nice, simple way for someone like me to understand. I'm sure a lot of our listeners will kind of take a lot from that. So thank you. You obviously mentioned they've been around for a while. Interesting to hear about the projects in Japan and China. At the moment, what are the most commonly used batteries in energy storage? And what advantages do flow batteries bring over those?
Absolutely. So basically, all of our grid scale energy storage is elevated lakes. It's all pumped hydro when you look at capacity, which is wild. So, I mean, when you think about the technology advances that we've had since the 1940s and so on, to think that our utility scale energy storage is basically elevated lakes going through a hydroelectric plant, we have not moved that football forward much. Lithium ion is making huge strides. I mean, unbelievable growth, to the point where the numbers are, it's almost like the gold rush in San Francisco back in the day. So that is a growing asset class for utility scale storage, is lithium ion. And we're all probably very aware of that. We probably didn't know that 90+% of our utility scale storage is elevated lakes. I'm guessing the average listener didn't know that. But we're all aware of all of these lithium ion projects that are going in at the utility scale, making headlines sort of week over week, month over month, and Bloomberg. But aside from that, there's really not a lot. It's basically lithium ion. Most of it is 2 hours. So it started about 10 years ago at the 15-minute duration to do what's called frequency regulation, which, not to get into the weeds, is basically to, when somebody turns on a conveyor belt in a factory or some high power draw equipment somewhere on the grid, it kind of perturbs everything. And so the battery was able to instantaneously kick on and support that. So those were 15-minute batteries. We've stretched out to about 2 hours now. 95% of batteries in Texas are 2 hours, doing a bunch of shorter duration types of things. But really what's coming is long duration energy storage, right? So if we want to store solar and wind, and it's probably the most cliche thing in our industry, is the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. And there's tons of use cases outside of that for long duration as well. So we can talk about transmission and congestion of transmission and all of the sort of interesting applications that are not just the common sense ones, but in reality, it's common sense because it's real and it's big, and we need to solve it. Storing solar and wind when they are not producing to their maximum capacity or not producing at all is the grand challenge for getting off of fossil fuels, right? And so if we want to mothball thermal assets, is what they're called, gas plants, coal plants are probably coming sooner, so on and so forth. If we want to move off of those and transition into intermittent renewables, we need storage for that. We just have to be able to back that up. And so that is not a 2-hour battery. It's not a 4-hour battery. That's a longer duration asset for energy storage. And so that kind of becomes the question is, what is that going to look like? And we believe we have a pretty compelling tool and solution for the market for that.
Let's get into that then. So you alluded to the USP earlier, the kind of change in liquid. So what inspired you to found the business, XL Batteries, and kind of talk us through your journey of doing so and then your mission moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of a funny story. We serendipitously found the chemistry. So I was a graduate student at BU. I was a Vertex pharmaceutical scholar. So synthetic organic chemistry is what it's called. There's a tree frog or a sea sponge or a bark in the Amazon, and the isolation chemists have a fun job. They get to go and deep sea dive or trek through the rainforest, and they collect the specimens, and then you sort of break that down, and out of the tree frog, molecule 3052 out of 15,000 is the one that's bioactive, and it's the next heart drug or cancer drug or whatever it may be, but we can't grind up tree frogs and make pills. That's not how this works. So a synthetic chemist would take that molecule that's identified and tested and make it from essentially oil and gas feedstocks. And that's how the Pfizers and the Mercks manufacture. So A becomes B, becomes C, becomes D, becomes the product that was in the frog. It's the exact same molecule, but made in a synthetic way. I was always interested in unnatural products, though. So sort of things that never existed in the universe before, and bringing those into creation, that always sort of fascinated me. And so generally carbon materials. I was looking at things that were electroactive, if you will. So OLEDs would be the version that we're most familiar with. So all the lighting around us, that's an organic molecule that when you put voltage across it lights up. And so that's an example. And so that stuff always interested me. And we were working on solar cells, actually, at Columbia University, where I was doing my postdoctoral fellowship. And we were making a molecule that was a light harvester for solar cells. And it was made out of paint, actually. Benjamin Moore's red is the color code. An old 1920s vat dye. They used to boil linen in it to dye it red. And we were building it up into this really complicated molecule to do light harvesting for solar cells. And when it was charged in the solar cell, it essentially just never degraded. And that was so surprising to us that we looked at it much more closely. And so we collaborated with the battery lab, and it turns out that this building block that we were using, which is the red paint molecule, that was the thing that held this intrinsic stability. It wasn't the complicated thing baking, it was just that core sort of ubiquitous commodity feedstock. And so we collaborated with some battery labs. They tested it, and it was perfect battery. It just never decomposed. And so with that, we paired it with a positive molecule that is also perfectly stable. And we had a set, a positive and a negative, and we looked at them and said, this is really special. But when you look at organics and you look at sort of the type of battery they could make, if you look at the periodic table, the top left of the periodic table, so lithium, sodium, potassium are fun ones. Hydrogen is up above it. That's an even more fun one at a conference to talk about from a philosophical perspective. That's mobility. That's energy density. And so you don't need to understand why, but as a chemist, when you look at the periodic table, each row has sort of characteristics. And that top left is the most energy dense you're ever going to get. And so that's mobility. We're never going to compete with that with a heavy organic. But when you look at organics, its availability from a feedstock perspective, it's ultra low cost. That makes sense for stationary storage, right? So when you look at stationary storage, the white sheet of paper best type of battery for stationary storage is a flow battery. And so we looked at it and we said we had a real opportunity to take these organic molecules and replace vanadium. And then if we can put them into pH neutral water, we can rip out the sulfuric acid. And so that's, as synthetic chemists, that's what we can do, right? We can manipulate the molecules, make them what we want. And so we essentially attach soap, if you will. So how do you take a fat into water? You use soap. So we attach soap to the molecule, brings it into pH neutral water, and then we can sort of replace the gas in the car, if you will, from a flow battery perspective, and the cost structure out. And so that's sort of how the company came to be from a technology perspective, was just luck, right place, right time, and sort of seeing the uniqueness of the molecules and then understanding sort of the opportunity. And then the market is right? Ultra long duration at ultra low price points is sort of a up and coming market that's going to be, it's predicted to be about $4 trillion. And so we saw a market opportunity there. And societally, it's just a giant problem, right? This is not an easy problem. If we were able to solve it through something like a supply chain optimization of existing technology, or some sort of unique business model with existing technology, we would have. Right? This is a big problem that really takes innovation and hard science at its foundation. And so we come from a place of hard science, and we come from a place of innovation, and now we're building for product. And so that's the place it came from. And I felt like we had to, just quite honestly, as a graduate student and a postdoctoral fellow with a decade of training in the right place at the right time, seeing this unique opportunity and seeing sort of like that's what it takes is a decade of skill set being built up through sort of unique technical education and then being in the right place. Because I didn't pick the molecules, it was the lab having to work with these molecules, being in the right place at the right time, and then thinking about how many people at this moment in time across the globe sort of have this that they can hold in their hands that's even a shot on goal as a society towards solving one of these types of grand challenges. And we all looked around and thought, if we let it die, that's one less opportunity in the world. And there's probably not a lot of them out there. And so we felt like, let's just put one foot in front of the other and start. And so we did. And it really comes from a mission driven perspective of trying to provide a tool for society to make a difference.
That's an amazing story. And I think you'd be modest saying that you were lucky. I think if somebody had all those tools and was in that same situation, they might not have seen the opportunity that you did and had the confidence to kind of go out there and found the business. So really interesting story.
I think it's an old Mark Twain quote. Luck is preparedness meets opportunity. And I think that's a really good quote. Because I mean, you're right, it is preparedness. We were prepared to sort of take that step and see the opportunity, but it's opportunity, right? That is luck. Is you just happen to be in the right place at the right time, with the right people, the right team, and the right backers, and all of that. So I have been very lucky. The preparedness is there, but the opportunity is a once in a lifetime.
I had a question actually. So as you were talking through that, as you say, it's a huge problem. There's a huge need for this. Do you know how much of the US is reliant on the grid right now? How much energy is going from the grid?
Oh, that's a really good question. The IEA just released their Sankey diagram. So they do, I don't know if you've ever heard of a Sankey diagram. It's kind of the flow chart of all the production and then sort of all the uses and how it branches off. And a lot of it is thermal, not just electricity. So heat and mobility, so like gasoline. So I think that's probably a better way to look at it, because those things are going to transition to electricity, and that's a really interesting conversation, is how much is load growth going to sort of take off as we transition. But I can't remember. It's a gigantic in terms of terawatt hours. It's remarkable. And so yeah, I don't have that off the top of my head, but the IEA just released their new study a couple weeks ago. If anybody's interested, sort of looking at the total energy use of America, that was just put out.
And you mentioned I guess one of your USPs is the cost element, and that's, I guess, down to the different element, the new liquids. And you mentioned the abundance of this, and I think a key element of the energy storage industry in the US is success in the future will be supply chain, local supply chain. So talk us through that and kind of how you identified that opportunity with this liquid.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really interesting thing. And this comes into sort of the founding of the company. And I sort of talked about like how many opportunities or shots on goal, if you will, does society have at solving a problem like this? And the reason that it's so rare is because just mathematically, it's very few things on Earth are abundant enough to replace what is essentially oil and gas as our energy production. So when you think about solar producing, you then have the storage component instead of the production side, but very few elements on Earth have enough mass, like physical mass, to store the amount of electrons that we consume as a society. And so I think it's a very difficult mathematical problem from the beginning of what it could be. And so you see some things, right? It's like iron, sulfur, air as a cathode, zinc, so on and so. But there's so few things on Earth that it's probably like a single hand type of count. And so that was one of the things that really led us to believe that this was something that we needed to do, was that organics come from oil and gas, right? Which is the largest physical infrastructure in the world. they are at scale, and they are at the largest scale, and they are one of the few things on Earth that could possibly have enough mass to solve this problem. And so when you look at our supply chain, our ingredients are things like sulfuric acid as an ingredient, not as a liquid for the charge storage, but it's one of the things that does the reaction, and then it can be recycled. It's things like oxygen, it's things like ammonia, so on and so. Just the most ubiquitous and cheapest chemical feedstocks in the world go into our transformations, and nothing is wasted. Everything that is used goes into the molecule itself. It's called atom economy. And so all of our supply chain is global, right? These things are produced everywhere at the largest scale. And it can all be sourced from places that are not sort of difficult from a geopolitical perspective or difficult from a competitive perspective. And quite honestly, they can all be local in terms of production so that we don't have to deal with logistics of shipping and so on and so forth. But we don't really have anything that is only found in a unique place on Earth, and everything is found at the largest scale. And so it's mostly oil and gas and sort of that infrastructure, which actually it's really interesting, right? Like that is an opportunity, oil and gas. The key is just don't burn it, right? It's take it and transform it into something that can store clean energy for 20 years and be, if you want to think of it this way, recycled every day as a charged storage material. It's already scaled. That whole supply chain and that entire industry is 150 years in the making at the largest scale in the world. And the problem is when you burn it. The problem isn't sort of having it out there, it's burning it. So our goal is to sort of take that and transform the industry into sort of a new, cleaner type of chemical product.
That's a really fascinating comment on the oil industry. As long as we don't burn it, there could be a huge potential there. As you say, the infrastructure and the experience and the expertise we have, that's a whole 2-hour conversation itself. Fascinating. What you're describing sounds really exciting. I can kind of feel your passion, and this solution could genuinely be game changer. I'm sure there's going to be some challenges along the way. So let's say if you were to paint a perfect picture of what XL batteries will look like in 5 years, talk me through it.
So our goal right now is sort of to scale, right? It's to design commercial product and scale. So we have prototype fully functioning in the lab. We're moving it outside currently, sort of as we speak, into a shipping container field unit. Our vision is essentially, if you want to think of it like an engine and a gas tank, our engine is going to be a factory assembled tractor trailer type of container for ease of shipping and ease of assembly and manufacturing, ultra low cost of the engine portion. And then what you think of is the large tanks that you maybe have seen on the coast that store fuels or water, but those large steel tanks would be the gas tank. And so we're talking very large type of installations. And so that is the vision for us now, is that commercial design and commercial manufacturing. So in 5 years, my hope is that XL batteries are sort of out there in the world that you can drive by and see, and they're making an impact on the utility scale, sort of at the hundreds of megawatt hours type of scale. And then from there, I mean, we're talking about, our goal is a million metric tons of compound, and then really it's tens of millions and hundreds of millions of metric tons of compound. The feedstocks are there. This is not going to hit the wall from a theoretical perspective. We think that we have what lithium is for mobility, sort of an archetypal catch-all type of battery that has a lot of different form factors, right? They're in cars, they're in personal electronics, they're in your phone, so on and so forth, but it's all sort of that similar chemistry. We think we have a chemistry for stationary storage that's that same way. It's a powder, right? And then that powder can make its way into many different sizes and form factors of stationary storage. and flow batteries, right? So that's one of the things we didn't really touch on it a ton, but I think it's a really interesting thing when you think about flow batteries. It's the multiple durations that are accessible from one singular type of device, right? If you change the tank size, you have different durations. And so when you think about backing up solar and wind, and you think about the grid as a holistic web of thousands of assets sort of interconnected and working together, solar and wind doesn't disappear for the same amount of time and the same amount, whether it be cloudy or partially cloudy and so on. It doesn't disappear consistently. And so in reality, it's a probability, right? It's a curve of probabilities. It's 12 hours, 24 hours, 36 hours, and so on. And a 36-hour battery can discharge for 12 hours, right? It's able to. So it's really going to be a mix of multiple durations out there on the grid backing up the probabilities. And that's one of the really interesting things about a flow battery is that it's not locked into one singular duration. So you can maximize your effectiveness by being tailored for sort of the geography and the generation profile that you're going to get from intermittency in terms of California versus New England and Texas and Minnesota and so on and so forth. And so that's a really powerful thing. It's the same technology, just different tanks. And you can maximize your cost in terms of or minimize your cost, I guess is a better way to say it, because you're not overbuilding, you're just matching your probability curve from your asset. And then the other thing is efficiency, right? So just like your car, you get 35 miles per gallon, whether you have a half a tank or a full tank, still 35 miles per gallon. And a flow battery is the same way. And it's a really powerful thing. You're still in the 70s in terms of round trip efficiency, whether you're 12 hours or 24 hours or 48 hours or 100 hours, it's the same efficiency. And when you talk about efficiency at the largest scale, at the first stop on the grid, it really matters, right? And so there's a really easy way to think about it. If you buy 100 apples and you throw 70 of them away, or you throw 30 of them away, and you go to sell them back, it's better to sell 70 than 30, right? Like it's economically very impactful to not have waste. And that makes its way to the consumer, right? So a lot of the archetypes of energy storage that are sort of being out there at the largest scale have very low efficiency, like 30 to 35% round trip efficiency. And that is going to greatly impact the cost of the grid if we're throwing away 70 to 65% of the electricity generated. And then the other piece is you're asking the generation side to basically triple, right? So solar now needs to triple and wind needs to triple and so on and so forth. And that's a huge cost and a huge infrastructure problem. Where is it going to go? The siting perspective, the transmission, if you now have more sites, transmission is its whole other problem, so on and so forth. And so we think efficiency at the first stop at the grid is a really, really important thing. And flow batteries sort of have that. So when we talk about a vision and sort of what I hope XL batteries, and I believe XL batteries will be, it will be that we are seeing installations in the field. We are seeing the impact of this archetype of technology sort of being placed in high value places. And we're showing what this can be because there is no really theoretical limit on scale for organics and these specific organics. So it's really about showing the value and showing the path. And then from there, I hope XL batteries are everywhere. I hope you drive down the road and you see one next to a solar field, or you see one next to a factory, and so on and so forth. But we really think the powder, that chemistry is the key foundational piece that sort of unlocks the ability to make these ubiquitous.
Tom, this has been amazing, super insightful, very thought-provoking as well. And you're very, of course, educational for someone like me as well. This is the first time I'm having someone on the show talking about flow batteries, and I'll put a second recording in the diary for 5 years' time, and we can reflect and see and see where we're at, so we can hold you accountable. But yeah, Tom, thank you so much. We just have one final question. It's from a former guest, And of course, you don't know what this question is. So they have asked, what do you see as the biggest risk to, what do you see as the biggest risk to the battery ecosystem in the US?
Interesting. Okay, so the question is, what do I see as the biggest risk to the battery ecosystem? Yeah, good question. I think it kind of depends. There's a number of risks based on which technology you're sort of talking about. So if you're talking about batteries from like a lithium ion perspective, and sort of the onshoring of cell manufacturing, I think probably the biggest risk is going to be cost and sort of the policy side of incentivizing the onshoring of manufacturing. I think another risk is, and it's not really a risk, but it's kind of a risk, technology. Right, we saw Northvolt struggle because they couldn't get the factory to produce, even though the technology is well known. It's just difficult manufacturing for lithium ion. Very, very difficult manufacturing. So that's a risk, is sort of the time and money that it takes to bring those operations to good production. Policy side on the sort of onshoring incentives of bringing cell manufacturing. But then if you talk about assembly, so sort of like the pack side, so not the cells, but the buying of the cells and the assembling and integration into pack. I think EVs is a question, right? Not really a question in the long term, but a question in the short term in the market structure and demand. You're seeing people sort of roll back demand forecasts. I don't think ultimately it's going to go away. I think it's just sort of timing of things. And then also you're seeing a lot of like plug-in hybrids. So batteries that are 1/10 the size of a full-on EV, but that covers 90% of people's driving habits. And so sort of you can get a lot more pack for the same amount of cells, if you will. Like you can make 10 packs versus one pack, and 10 cars versus one car if you move towards the plug-in hybrid, but that obviously lowers demand on the pack or on the cell side. And so that's sort of an interesting conversation is EVs. And then I think when you talk about alternative battery technologies, the risks are technology based. So it's going to depend sort of what the technology is you're talking about. Zinc bromide, if you're talking about sort of metal catalyzed air types of cathodes, or things like sulfur as a cathode with lithium, so on and so forth. They're going to be solid state. It's a whole fun one. So I think that gets into a whole technology sort of discussion, which I will steer clear from because I think it gets deep into the weeds very quickly. But I would say supply chain, policy, and sort of demand when you think of classical lithium types of batteries.
Well, yeah, Tom, thank you very much again. Appreciate you coming to the show today and taking charge. And yeah, good luck for the exciting road ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Really enjoyed it.